Good morning, and thanks all for joining this IISS America's event on Iran's future military capabilities. This is part of a larger project that we just embarked upon, thinking ahead to 3 years from now when the arms embargo on Iran will come off in accordance with the conditions of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Actually, it could come off earlier than 3 years if Iran were miraculously to persuade the IEA that all of its nuclear activities are entirely for peaceful purposes. But with or without that, in 3 years, the arms embargo comes off. So we're looking ahead to how Iran's neighbors and other concerned states should be anticipating what military capabilities Iran would have in the near future, and how to respond or mitigate that. Very pleased today that 3 experts are here to discuss different aspects of this question. We're starting off with Michael Eisenstadt, who's the Kahn Fellow and Director of the Washington Institute's Military and Security Studies Program. He's a specialist in Persian Gulf and Arab-Israeli security affairs. He's published widely on irregular and conventional warfare and nuclear weapons proliferation in the Middle East. Prior to joining the Washington Institute in 1989, Mike worked as a military analyst with the U.S. government, and this is not his first time on this stage, and won't be the last time, I hope. Admiral John Fozzie Miller is a consultant, policy advisor, and speaker based in Washington. In 2015, he retired from the U.S. Navy after serving as commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, U.S. Fifth Fleet, and Combined Maritime Forces. He was based in Bahrain for some of his last years in the Navy, and he became a friend of IISS in that capacity, and we're very pleased that you've continued that and also joined in more than one of our events. He spent considerable time focused on the Middle East, and he's currently a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And lastly, Mike Elliman, my colleague here at IISS Americas, is the senior fellow for missile defense for the IISS. He was the principal author last year of what I think was a very good dossier on missile defense cooperation in the Gulf. Earlier in 2011, Mike was also the principal author of this dossier on Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. He's a leading global expert on ballistic missiles. You've seen him quoted in leading journals and other media outlets. So we're going to run for an hour. We'll have each of the experts present for about no more than 10 minutes, and then have a discussion. This event is being live streamed, and I welcome anyone who's watching it live streamed. If you have questions, send them to me via Twitter. My handle is Fitzpatrick IISS, and we'll see if we can incorporate some live questions into the discussion. If you're not watching it live, but you want to watch it later, it's going to be posted on our website, a video thereof. So let's kick off. Mike Eisenstadt, give us a little bit of where Iran has been, some big picture thoughts about where they're going and what the trend lines might be.
Okay, I'll start up front with a spoiler alert. My bottom lines are more continuity than change. As a result of the experience in Syria, I think we'll see some rebalancing, some filling of gaps, but by and large, I think Iran's force structure, which reflects a certain way of war and certain assumptions about the best way to use national power, will more or less be what they stay with as they go forward. That said, I think it's important to say that, at least there's a lot that I don't understand about Iranian decision-making with regard to procurement and why they do what they do, and I think there's a great dissertation for a Farsi-speaking graduate student to write on this topic. They have a unique hybrid force structure. By regional standards, relatively small ground and air forces, a very robust guerrilla navy, the largest missile forces in the region, and heavy reliance on proxies. And I think that's the pattern we'll see going forward into the future. The question is, was this born of necessity because they simply could not buy a large conventional military because of lack of access to arms, because of sanctions and the like, or does this reflect a certain way of war. My argument is it's a little bit of both, but to a great extent it's a reflection of a uniquely Iranian way of war that's related to the Islamic Republic, not the Shah's Iran. Now let me just say, those who say that it was mainly constraints that launched them in this direction say that basically they're a conventional great power wannabe, but because they can't, they've adopted asymmetric approaches. Asymmetric warfare is the warfare of the weak, and therefore that's why you see them focusing on guerrilla navy and the like. I say, yes, there's an element of that. For instance, the emphasis on missiles may have been because they couldn't build a large air force, and in the Iran-Iraq war they discovered the importance and the potency of missiles, so they've gone down this path. But I think it's also because they have a way of war which focuses on shaping operations, using proxies and information warfare, while trying to avoid major conventional warfare through deterrence. Remember, they referred to the Iran-Iraq war as the imposed war, not just because I think Iraq invaded and imposed the war on them, but because major conventional warfare is not their preferred way of warfare. It's very costly, and I'll say a little bit more about that on how Syria plays into that. So as I mentioned, there was an element of both because they couldn't buy. I think they would have liked to have gotten more conventional weapons. After the end of the Cold War, they were shopping around in Eastern Europe for large numbers of tanks and combat aircraft and the like, and the United States did a lot to prevent them from purchasing these kind of capabilities. I think the emphasis on missiles was, again, as I said before, as a result of the emphasis or the lessons learned from the Iran-Iraq war. I think there's also a guns and butter issue here. Guns and butter in Iraq, the emphasis on ensuring the quality of life for the mustazafin, the downtrodden, is part of the ideology of the revolution. Tremendous resources have been devoted in the past to subsidies. And I think this is also is seen as a security investment, that the main fear of a revolutionary government is counter-revolution. And the way to prevent this is to ensure that people have bread. And this will continue to be a consideration as they go forward. So butter will still be a priority. At least it depends, I think, whether, which faction holds the upper hand in Tehran. But I think this is the path they've been taking and they'll continue to take. Now, did Syria change any of this? I would just say that basically, keep in mind, Syria was like the Iran-Iraq war in that it was an imposed war. This was not something that they wanted to do as of their own initiative. They were forced to intervene in order to uphold or to ensure the survival of their major regional state partner and ensure the lifeline to Hezbollah remained open. So they created an expeditionary capability and they created the Shiite Foreign Legion. And in doing so, they basically used the minimum of their own force to keep Assad afloat while offloading risk and burden on their partners. This, to me, is not the profile of a military seeking to become a major conventional military because, again, major conventional warfare is very costly, and everything they've done until now has been done in order to offload risk and cost on their partners or the Russians. So I don't see them going in the direction of building a large conventional military. And what they've done is they've augmented the Quds Force with their IRGC ground forces, with members, elements of the Artesh and the Basij. Artesh is the regular army. So in other words, their special forces have become more conventional in a way, and their conventional forces have become more special in a way. And that's what's happened actually in the US military in the last 15, 16 years too. So more of that, more of the same, building an expeditionary capability, but again, around their proxies. So what will they do? I think they'll continue to build up their Shiite Foreign Legion. They'll try to fill capabilities gaps when they are able to purchase arms from overseas. Fill capabilities gaps, certainly small numbers of highly capable combat aircraft, maybe some more tanks. This is stuff that they've shown they're trying to do domestically without success thus far, really. So I think there's some gaps. They'd like to have perhaps a larger air force and more capable ground forces. But again, the emphasis will be on building up their guerrilla navy, maybe strengthening their blue water capabilities in terms of strengthening their conventional navy. Missiles. Simply because to build, first of all, missiles can do a lot of what they would want to do with conventional air force, and conventional air force is very expensive. squadron of fighter aircraft is $2.5 billion or so. That's just up front, and that's not with all the infrastructure you have to build. So this would cost them tens of billions just to build a modern Air Force, just the fighter component of a modern Air Force, never mind all the other elements. So large conventional military is very expensive. So build up their Shiite Foreign Legion, build up the enablers for the Foreign Legion, that is air and artillery assets, ISR, surveillance and reconnaissance, and intra-theater transport capabilities. More emphasis on cyber, which already they've been doing. So again, continuing down this path, I'll conclude with two final points. Is there anything that the United States can do to shape their threat perceptions, to alter their allocation of resources in a way that is more conducive to our interests? In other words, is it in our interest for them to have such large missile forces, or should we try, is there something we could do to enhance threat perceptions to draw our resources away? Or do you want them to keep going down this path because we have robust missile defenses? This is a problem to which we have the solution, albeit it's a very expensive one. And they can outspend us in this regard because ballistic missiles are cheap and missile defenses are expensive. But that's something we should think about. There might be things we can do to alter their choices in this regard. In terms of the most important factors influencing the future military balance, and this is my final point, I think that there are two things that are more important than Iranian procurement decisions that are much more important in terms of shaping the regional military balance. First of all, the U.S. role in the region. Are we going to stay engaged? And regional perceptions of American competence and resolve. That's the number one thing that can affect the regional military balance and Iranian calculations regarding war and peace. Secondly, the ability of the Gulf Arabs to transcend political differences and function as a viable coalition. Right now, the sum is less than the whole is less than the sum of the parts in terms of the Gulf Arab military capabilities. Is there anything we could do to change that? And I'm skeptical, because this is rooted in, those of you who are familiar with Ibn Khaldun, the medieval Arab philosopher, talked about Asabiyya. And Asabiyya is in-group solidarity, and basically each kingdom files its own interests and doesn't cooperate because of this intense distrust among the Gulf states, except for maybe the Emirates and Saudi and the Bahrain and the Saudis, but with the others, it's a big problem. And then the third factor is Iran's ability to forge a Shiite Foreign Legion into a viable expeditionary force with Iranian enablers. And they're in the process of doing this, but there's limits into what they could accomplish. We've seen how hard it's been in Syria for them. It's been a heavy lift, and it was the Russian intervention which really finally enabled them to do what they've done recently. So I will leave it at that, and I look forward to the discussion after hearing the comments of my colleagues on the panel.
Thanks very much, Mike. That's brilliant. A lot of key points there, a lot of themes. We can expand upon many of them in the discussion. And I'm glad you got to also this question about policy implications and what the United States could do to try to change the trend lines. When you talked about your pessimism about the ability of the Gulf states to really coalesce and to make the sum of the parts the whole equal to the sum of the parts. That's something we discussed in our book that you were part of the discussion here. And we're kind of pessimistic about that, but remains something that we all wish we could see. Fawzi, give us some of your perspectives, probably from a naval perspective, but range as far wide as you'd like.
Okay, Mark, thanks for the opportunity. It's a great pleasure to be back here with you all. When I first started to look at this, I think the first question I asked myself was, what are Iran's goals in the region? What are they trying to do? So obviously the most important thing to them is regime survival. They are looking to become a major power in the region and to attain a certain amount of hegemony. They're also looking to continue to export the revolution, and quite frankly, they benefit from a certain amount of instability in the region. So a lot of the asymmetric activity that Mike talked about is activity that they find useful, if for no other reason than to keep us and to keep some of the other major players in the region, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis, on our toes. And then, of course, they're looking to get the U.S. presence out of the region. So with those in mind as sort of their goals, you have to look at what's the purpose of their military. Well, the primary purpose, I think, of the military is to defend the homeland and to defend the regime. And I think that's why to sort of address the point that Mike brought up. Why they built the force that they built, really there are a couple of primary drivers in that. One, they learned in the Iran-Iraq War and the Battle of the Cities that a robust missile program is affordable and it can be very effective. And I think that's what's driven that program over the years. They also know that they need to or want to be able to exert a certain amount of control over the Strait of Hormuz. And they have significant economic interests that revolve around the flow of commerce in the Gulf. And so that's what drives, I believe, their focus on the naval forces that they have. What I think has primarily driven the focus on what type of naval forces they have, which is a very robust IRGC Navy that's mostly small craft that are capable of harassing larger navies. And a very small and for the most part very old blue water navy that predates the revolution. I think most of that is not that's the navy they would like to have so much as that's the navy they've been able to afford and able to develop and has been most cost effective. I do want to go back to a point Mike made, which I think is a very important point, and one that's often overlooked, is this whole guns and butter discussion about Iran. I think they would like to spend more money on their military, but there is a significant pressure within the country to make sure that they take care of the people, particularly the people that are the have-nots. And you saw that if you watched any of the election debates. Many of the candidates were pretty well off, and they spent a lot of time explaining why they were well off. You know, it was a little bit different than the kind of election discussion that we had here in the United States. And then one of the things that their military is going to continue to do is export the revolution. We see them doing that all throughout the region. They do it mostly asymmetrically. You see that in Bahrain, the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. You see it in a very strong way in Lebanon. We see it now in Syria. We see it in Yemen, and we see it in Iraq. So, what are they going to do if they find themselves in a position where the sanctions are taken off? They've got additional resources, some additional resources. I do think they want to modernize their conventional force. And I think the strongest evidence for that is about the first thing that happened after the JCPOA was signed. Is the defense minister and Qasem Soleimani went up to Moscow and met with the Russian defense minister. They finished the deal for the S-300 air defense system. That's an important step because that was the first modernization that the Iranians were able to do since the revolution. That system is now in the country. I don't think it's fully operational, but it's been tested. And so they took that step forward. While they were there, they talked about some other things as well, though. So they went with kind of a shopping list, if you will, of things that they wanted to buy, and that included Su-30s. That's a pretty significant weapon system. It is expensive, as Mike said, but it's an airplane that's about as capable as a U.S. F-15 Strike Eagle. And so it's not really, strictly an air defense fighter. It can range the Mediterranean. If they get that weapon system. So it doesn't just range the Gulf, it can reach out and touch significant distances. They also talked about the Yakout Coastal Defense Cruise Missile, which is a very significant upgrade in their coastal defense capabilities. It would significantly change the military situation in the Gulf for any Navy that operates in there. And they also talked about buying new main battle tanks. So I think there's an aspiration at least to be able to take the opportunity where they have finally gotten out from underneath the yoke of the sanctions to modernize their forces in a way they haven't done since the revolution. I mean, they're flying F-4s and F-5s. They use IHawks. The ships that they have, they built a couple of their own ships, the Jamaron frigate. I think have their third one under construction now. It is a blue water ship, not a particularly capable ship, but they don't have a robust shipbuilding industry of their own, and I think they'd like to be able to improve on that. They will continue to use asymmetric means. I think we're seeing that play out, in particular in Yemen And I think what's happening in Yemen ought to be of great concern to us, because they're supplying cruise missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, we think, to the Houthis, and the Houthis are using them. I don't know if they're using them in a way that the Iranians would like them to, but they're using them. And they're supplying, we think, mines to the Houthis, and they're using them in ports in and around the vicinity of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So the Iranians are now trying to have influence on 2 of the 3 major choke points in the region, and a significant amount of oil flows through both of those choke points every day. So I think we're going to continue to see them try to do that over a period of time, and we ought to be concerned about the relatively bold way in which they've done that. They through their proxy, the Houthis, have conducted anti-ship cruise missile attacks. They've conducted unmanned small boat attacks against a Saudi frigate, and we actually have some information where we think they actually thought that they were attacking a U.S. ship when they did that. So it was an unmanned boat that was sent out in the vicinity of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, struck a Saudi frigate just a few months ago. And so they're operating, I think, in a way through a proxy that's much more bold in a very sensitive body of water than what we've seen in the past, and I think we're going to see more of that. We did, as I think most of you are probably aware, just get the word from the administration yesterday that the Iranians are in compliance, but not with the spirit. I'm not exactly sure what that means, so maybe, Mike, you can help us with that. The other thing that the Iranians have done that I find very interesting, I've got a small video clip that I hope we get a chance to watch here if the technology works. But when they were attacked back in June in Tehran, there was a terrorist attack, they responded with a ballistic missile attack of their own. What's relatively significant about that, I think, are a couple things. One is they responded with indigenously produced ballistic missiles. 2, they put the results of that attack on TV. And 3, when they messaged it to a number of different entities. So is it possible to show that video clip?
Make it happen. Okay.
So this is on YouTube. So they launched 6 Zulfikar missiles in response to this terrorist attack. Do I need to get out of the way here? Pretty good range. They claim to be effective. So a message for the Islamic State who conducted the terrorist attack. The Saudis and the Americans. Qataris, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis. Now here's the best part. That's an Iranian UAV that's doing the bomb damage assessment of their own strike. So they were not able only to conduct the strikes. We can go ahead and turn that off. They had a UAV at night with an infrared sensor that assessed the results of that strike. So that gives us a little bit of an idea of how they might want to intend to operate in the future in an event where they want to have their fingerprints on it. And so they struck quickly, they struck effectively, and then they messaged not only the Islamic State, but they messaged effectively the entire GCC. Okay, I'll get to my last point, which is what can we do to mitigate these things in the future? The first point I'd like to make is we need a strong coalition, and that's what makes this current rift between the Qataris and some of the GCC states a matter of great concern. So if Mike's going to talk about ballistic missile defense, it takes all of the GCC countries to be involved in that for us to be successful. And if this situation between the Qataris and the rest of the GCC doesn't become resolved relatively quickly, we're going to find it very difficult to do missile defense. Beyond the GCC, Mark mentioned the Combined Maritime Force, currently 31 nations, all having to work together to make sure that there's continued stability and security, and all making sure that when the Iranians misbehave, and there is less unsafe and unprofessional behavior that we've seen this year over the last 6 months or so. So effectively since the new administration has come into office than what we saw in 2016. So their behavior seems to be a little bit better. I think that's likely due to some of the strategic ambiguity that's present in the region right now. I don't think the Iranians are quite sure how we might respond to unsafe or unprofessional behavior. And I think that in this particular case sort of acts as a damper on their behavior. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mike. There's sorry, Fozzie, there's several points here. Just one question. When the Iranians are talking to the Russians about purchase of expensive aircraft, they're not making any of these sales now, right? Because they can't. It would be a violation.
That's correct.
Yeah, they're thinking about 3 years from now.
Yeah, not far down the road, though.
Okay, right. Okay, Mike Elliman, please. Round
Sure.
it up.
Thank you. Two difficult acts to follow. I was really glad to hear what Mike had to say because it's consistent with what I'm going to discuss. I'm going to focus on 3 elements of Iran's defense and what I would consider to be their priorities. That is ballistic missiles, Air Force modernization, and what they'll do in the future, possibly with their air defenses. So let me start with what I know best, and that's their ballistic missiles. I think you're going to see they'll continue to prioritize ballistic missile acquisition, development over the future. We'll continue to see this transition from liquid-fueled systems to the solid-fueled systems, primarily because it offers greater self-sufficiency. For the Iranians, they can actually produce the engines or the motors necessary, and they can tailor them to what they believe they need. The solids provide shorter preparation times, smaller logistics trail. All this makes them more survivable, which will be another one of their priorities, that is to reduce pre-launch vulnerability. We're seeing this with their operational tactics, their tunnel complexes, and such. So the main focus of what they want to do is to improve the accuracy or the lethality of the missiles that they have. Presently, they're wildly inaccurate, meaning that you would have to launch upwards to a couple hundred missiles at a single specific target, in order to destroy it. But what we're seeing trending is this Fatah family of missiles, which includes the Zulfikar. These are systems that have some terminal maneuverability capacity, which allows them to adjust post-boost to come closer to the target. I think they still have quite a ways to go, but we'll see this evolutionary improvements in what they can do. They're also looking at multi-warhead or multi-bomblet missiles to expand the lethal radius of what the missile can deliver. And I think the fourth area that they're going to really have to start looking at, and I believe that they have started, that is how to counter the ballistic missile defenses in the region. We already see them employ salvo tactics in an attempt to overwhelm a certain sector of missile defense. This is why cooperation amongst the GCC states on missile defense is so important. They continue to use diverse launch points. All of their systems are highly mobile, which allows them to launch from anywhere they want. By using multiple launch angles or geometries, it can complicate missile defense. I think we'll see a lot more of this, what I'll call mixed attacks, where they fit in some cruise missiles along with their ballistic missiles. I think cruise missile acquisition will be a priority going forward, but it's much more difficult to create the small turbofan or turbojet engines that they would need to power them, and they're more difficult to get on the open market. So, the degree that they're able to do it remains to be seen. But I do believe that mixing in, low-flying threats such as cruise missiles, even armed drones, with the higher arcing ballistic missiles will be another tactic that they employ. I believe that in the midterm, we'll see them start to consider the development of decoys or penetration aids for some of their longer range missiles. This will require quite a bit of testing, but I do foresee that happening if the current trend of more and more missile defense in the region continues to go forward, and I don't see any reason why that would not happen. They've worked on trajectory manipulation, there's a small gap in the coverage between the Patriot and the THAAD missile defense systems, right around the 50-kilometer range, which is just above the ceiling for PAC-3, kind of below the floor of operation for THAAD. They're already doing that with the Fatah 110, but that has more to do with the aerodynamic control that's required to achieve accuracy than it is for defeating missile defense. But this is an example of what they can do. Maneuverable reentry vehicles to defeat the Patriot system. And I wouldn't discount the high probability that they'll engage in cyber and electronic warfare in an attempt to defeat missile defense. Air Force modernization, they'll try to address or at first at least, some of the weaknesses in their current force structure. Remember, they haven't really modernized, as Admiral Miller mentioned, with few exceptions since the era of the Shah. They have acquired some MiG aircraft, some of them from Iraq during Desert Storm, if you recall. But there are four areas that they're going to focus on. Combat aircraft, probably as you mentioned, the Su-30. They'll probably want to try to mix in the J-10, J-17 from China, possibly the MiG-29, 35 fighter bombers. Guided weapons, both to support air-to-air battle and air-to-ground weapons. Again, they'll probably rely mostly on the Russians and the Chinese for these. Podded ISR, their intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, and electronic warfare. Targeting will be a big challenge for them. We've seen an example where they have used the UAV, but recall that UAV is operating with ground forces that are actually in Syria. So their UAV for real-time targeting and real-time bomb damage assessment is limited to areas where they're actually operating and where they can have line-of-sight control of the UAV. They don't have presently satellite-controlled UAVs like we do. So this constrains their ability to actually conduct real-time operations in parts of the Gulf. I think the key question on Air Force modernization going forward is, what will their priority be? Fighters to supplement their air defenses, or ground-attack aircraft to supplement their ballistic missile forces? I would argue that fighters would probably be the higher priority, but I wouldn't discount the possibility of getting aircraft that can perform both missions. And the other real key question, and I don't know the answer to this, but in hearing the previous two speakers, perhaps it'll trend towards low to moderate, but what's the level of investment they're going to make in the air forces? Is it going to be low, moderate, or high? And I think that would change the force structure completely. A high investment would be completely replacing their air force with modern aircraft. The low would probably be just upgrading a few things, mostly on maintenance, procuring the Su-30, maybe the MiG or the Su-25 for ground attack. Those are all questions that remain to be seen, and maybe this is an area that that the United States and its allies should think about, shaping the threat environment, as Michael mentioned. Lastly, air defense. Again, they have an aging inventory of ground-based systems. They've just procured the S-300. They'll probably have to develop some kind of mix of Russian and Chinese systems, This will make integration more difficult down the road. But my sense is that they're going to either want co-production rights if they're to purchase these systems, or do domestic upgrades. I think this guns and butter issue will really play a big factor in how they decide to modernize their air defenses. Mobility will be a priority for survivability and to protect its ground forces as they move. You can see the SA-22 or the SA-15 as short-range systems that they would purchase. For medium range, maybe the SA-17 Grizzly. Radar coverage, this is something the Iranians have been working on despite the sanctions. And if you look at a lot of the Iranian websites, you see lots of Chinese electronic components and small radars. I think you're going to continue to see that. Again, co-production rights will be the key to actually the Russians or the Chinese in selling these systems. I think they want to have an indigenous program. It's part of their kind of being is, the lesson learned from the Iraq War is that is self-sufficiency. So along with the economics. And then, of course, command and control. So in summary, I just say ballistic missiles, the emphasis will be on increased accuracy, survivability, ballistic missile defense penetration. I don't think increasing the range of their systems will be a priority, but what I worry about is the transfer of the capabilities they have, especially if Assad solidifies power in Syria. Does Iran become Syria's provider of ballistic missiles, and what does that do to the Levant region? Improved air defenses, combat aircraft, and guided weapons acquisition, coupled with greater radar coverage and more effective and robust command and control, that will be a priority. How they exercise that priority remains to be seen, but my guess is they'll try to make it as indigenous as possible. Improved deep strike capacity that's not dependent on ballistic missiles. To me, this is the most difficult question to answer going forward. Are they going to become increasingly reliant on ground attack aircraft for the mission that their ballistic missiles currently perform? I don't know, but as Mike mentioned, the missiles are much cheaper, and I think they have a much better chance of actually working for the Iranians than, at least in the foreseeable future, because of the air superiority the U.S. and allied forces in the region would have. So I'll conclude with that.
Thanks very much, Mike. This discussion is very much in line with IISS Fort in addressing military capabilities. You're all familiar with our military balance, where we like to get into the weeds. And this discussion has gotten into the weeds. It reminds me that we're going to need to capture some of these themes and details in some upcoming publications as part of this project. Let's get into some discussion here. And to remind, I do have one question that came in via Twitter. Send it, any more questions, Fitzpatrick, IISS. So we'll start down here in the front with a couple of, and let's see, we'll get a, oh, and by the way, somebody's going to bring up a microphone and then give your name and affiliation and a short comment or question. I meant to say that we're conscious that this is a manel, and we tried not to make it a manel, but we got the best experts who were available, and we're very happy that they're able to come. So, please.
Hi, David Isby. Mike, just granting solely for the sake of argument what my Arab friends have been telling me for years, that this is a war, Iran has opened a war of aggression to take over the future of Islam, and it started in 1979 in the attack on Mecca. Just granting for a sake of argument that's the case, what will be their next move in their things? Is it going to be continuing, not just the current conflicts, but where are they likely to go after that? Syria, I'm concerned about the Afghanistan, so where do you see them doing?
I want to take a couple questions, so let's, Harlan, right in the front here too. Just turn around there.
I'm Harlan Ullman. Thanks very much for a really informative panel. I'd like to expand the aperture a bit. Some of you may know Adam Holloway, a very interesting member of parliament who just came back from Syria. And one of the things that Adam observed was that Iran now has a highway from Iran all the way to Lebanon, obviously in large part to reinforce Hezbollah and Israel. We haven't discussed Israel yet, so I've got three questions. First, what are your attitudes about how Israel is shaping Iranian thinking? Second, Admiral Miller raised the issue of UAVs, and I wondered what the extent of Iranian use of UAVs is and where it's headed. And last, we really haven't talked about cyber, and as you know, Iran has a very robust private sector, in brackets, cyber capacity. Given what the UAE has done in Qatar, what do you see about Iranian techniques in using cyber as a way to advance its interests?
So thanks very much. I think these questions mainly were to Mike and Fozzie. Mike, I'll let you go first, and then Fozzie come in on the question that was posed to you.
I'll just, in rapid fire fashion, I think one obvious possibility is the Golan in Israel. I mean, it seems that Iran and Hezbollah are trying to create infrastructure in the Golan so that they can, kind of wage a long-term war of attrition there, like they did against Israel when Israel occupied Lebanon, but doing so in a way, that might be me, I'm sorry, doing so in a way that does not lead to escalation in Lebanon. So I think, Israel is one potential flashpoint. But let me just say, Iran's policy has always been, there's an element, I think, of they have a vision, but they're opportunistic. So it also depends on how the relationship with Saudi unfolds. And if there's an incident related to the Hajj or whatever, that could, influence your trajectory. Land bridge, this is not the first time they've had a land bridge, and I'm not sure it is important for them. So they always want redundancy in terms of their lines of communication with their proxies. So twice they've sent flotillas to Syria through the Suez Canal. That's, though, unreliable in wartime. Likewise, their air bridge is unreliable. The Israeli Air Force could close Damascus airport in a war. So they want to have that land bridge to provide redundancy. Plus, it enables them to provide, as I call it, the arc of influence. I don't like the Shiite kind of crescent, but there's a lot of Sunni communities in between in there. But it'll force them to engage communities all along this kind of land bridge and to identify people they could work with and proxies and the like. So that enhances their regional influence. How is Israel shaping Iranian thinking? One way, what's interesting, I think Israel has had a profound influence on aspects of Iran's kind of thinking about things. I think they had a front seat view of Israeli use of UAVs in '82. And as a result, I think they were early adopters of UAVs. So that's one way in which I think it's had an impact on them. And then finally, cyber is very important. I would argue that they have three legs of their deterrent warfighting triad: their guerrilla navy, the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, proxies and terrorist and conventional proxies, and then long-range strike systems, mainly missiles. Cyber, I think, will become eventually the fourth leg of their deterrent warfighting triad, because we live in glass houses from the point of view of cyber. We're very vulnerable. And they have the ability with cyber to strike enemies instantaneously, on a global basis, and on a sustained basis in ways they cannot in the conventional or in the physical realm. So that will be very appealing to them, and we're very vulnerable. So that will be increasingly important for them.
Thanks, Mike. Buzz, you want to add to anything there?
Yeah, very quickly, on the UAV, they've made a lot of progress in UAVs. So Mike pointed out they don't control UAVs by satellite, but they know how to use them in ways that are useful to them in the Gulf. And it's only a matter of time before they either arm those UAVs or they use the UAVs as an armed system all by itself. And so they've made huge amounts of progress, and they continue to do it. They've deployed them into, as Mike said, into Syria and probably other places as well. So it's a growth industry for them, and they're making a lot of progress, and it's something to be concerned about. And Mike's right; they've already attacked the Saudis, they've already attacked the Qataris via cyber. So we are vulnerable, and it's something that we need to work on. Our cyber defenses.
Okay, thanks very much, Fozzie. I'm going to go to a third row here, Greg, and then I have a couple questions came in via Twitter. I'm going to throw in as appropriate.
Greg Thielman, board of the Arms Control Association. One of the categories of weapons that I heard no mention of is chemical weapons. Iran's regional neighbors Syria and Iraq in the past went into chemical weapons and very big. Sorry about that. Iran, even after years of being by Saddam Hussein, eventually developed chemical weapons, but I think experts agree never used them. Is there any interest you see in Iran in developing chemical weapons for missile warheads, or do the Iranians really regard them as un-Islamic?
Thanks, Greg. And we'll go over across the aisle here, fourth row. Young lady there, the fourth row.
I might not use this if it starts to do the same. My question for you is, assuming Iran does expand its conventional army to some extent, given the tensions that exist between the conventional army and the IRGC, with the army tending to lean a little bit more in President Rouhani's direction, do you see that as possibly creating any kind of beneficial outcome in terms of weakening the IRGC in coordination with what President Rouhani has been doing for in the past few years and now more actively, which is pushing them out of the private sector quietly?
Good. Could you just identify yourself, please? Thank you. So a couple of questions about things that we didn't talk much about, potential for chemical weapons and the implications of the split between the IRGC and the conventional forces and how that will be going. So any thoughts on this? Either part of this?
Just on the chemical weapons, this has been a source of controversy or not, but does Iran actually have a stockpile of chemical weapons? I suspect they don't, but I'm certain that they have the capacity to produce them if they find a need to do so. I do think that, they were upset with Assad's use of chemical weapons in 2013. I mean, they even came out and said so. Now, that may have been a ploy to help them with because they were in the middle of preparing for negotiations on the nuclear deal. So it served their purpose to be outraged by that attack. But I sense that there is in Iran a strong feeling that it is un-Islamic. I think they would only resort to chemical weapons if they were attacked with a large chemical attack. Even if it was a small one, I don't think they would respond in kind. I think they would take a different form of retaliation. But they certainly have the capacity to produce the agent itself, whether it be VX or sarin, whatever. That I have a few doubts about. I think they could arm their missiles. It would be quite straightforward. But again, ballistic missiles are a very poor way of actually dispersing chemical weapons. I would argue that they would probably use UAVs and cruise missiles for that purpose because it's a much more efficient means. But that's of all the things that I worry about Iran doing, that's probably low on my list at this point.
If I could just quickly jump in. Yeah, I'll just say that Iranian policy is guided by the concept of maslahat al-nizam, which is kind of the expediency of the regime. And basically, anything is permissible if the survival of the regime is at stake. So I would say, and also during the Iran-Iraq War, by the way, I'm agnostic whether they used it or not. If they did, it was on a very limited basis. So we just don't know. Their signature to the CWC ostensibly have given up. But keep in mind, both Libya and Syria apparently had hedged and had retained residual stockpiles, even though signing the CWC. So it's possible that they do have residual capability. I'm not sure they consider it that useful in most cases. So it's certainly not a weapon of first or second resort for them. But like I think Mike said, if it's used against them, it's an option for them in the future. And the IRGC and the Army, I don't have a complete answer to this, except to say it's a lot more complicated because we know the IRGC, from Iranian sources, there were people in the Khatami administration who said in '97, IRGC districts of Tehran that were, IRGC kind of completely, neighborhoods that were IRGC neighborhoods voted for Khatami in the same percentage as the general population. So the rank and file it's a conscript organization, and the rank and file represents the mainstream of the population. The leadership is radical. But the rank and file, And they've been careful not to use the RGC in the street in 2009 in the ways that could result in the fracturing because of that. So they rely on law enforcement forces, Basij and Ansari Hezbollah and stuff, groups like that. So the relationship between the two is more complex, and in ways that I don't really understand. And there is also, some of the senior leaders in the regular military are IRGC guys who are seconded or rotate through. So how this plays out, I don't really know. But it's more complicated than one would think, just from this kind of bifurcation of.
When we don't know, we say we don't know. I got two questions came in via Twitter. One, I think, Fozzie, the other one to Mike Elliman, although you all can comment on both of them. So Jeremy Vaughn asked a question about Iran's ballistic missile attack against ISIS. And he characterizes it as a failed attack, because only 2 of the supposedly 7 missiles fired reached their destination. So he's asking, was it a bad shot, a bad batch, or a bad system? And then Brian Swartz asks, what will the region look like for missile defense if the Qatari crisis is not resolved? And that maybe Mike Elliman you could address. Fozzie, can you take the first one maybe, or any element of it?
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily describe it as a failed attack, even though it looks like it went about 2 for 7, which is probably not a surprise, given where they are with their technology. So, and Mike talked to this when he spoke, that because of the relative accuracy of their missiles, they're going to need to launch a lot of missiles to get the results that they want. But if you look at what they're really trying to do here, which is make a statement, not so much necessarily kill a lot of terrorists, they do make a statement. So it had the desired effect, I think.
Good. Thank you, Fozzie. Mike?
Yeah, I agree with what Fozzie said. That this is more about messaging than it was about some kind of kinetic efficacy. They wanted to show that they can respond in the same way the U.S. responded to the chemical weapons attacks earlier this year, launched 56 cruise missiles at an air base. So this was just part of their bread and butter, reinforcing their stance that ballistic missiles are used for deterrence purposes and in times actual attacks. The fact that only 2 out of the 7 was successful, that doesn't surprise me. The Zulfikar system is relatively new. It hasn't been tested very much, as far as I know. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it is, because if you look at what they've shown publicly, I don't think that missile can actually reach 600 kilometers. So in the video, they show something that looks a lot longer than what we've seen before. I don't know if they've staged it where it has 2 stages to reach that distance. What I do find interesting is that they did elect to use this Zulfikar, which is untested and unproven, which explains why so many of them failed to reach their target. Why didn't they use the Qayyam missile, which is a modified version of the Scud-C that they've had since 2010? They presumably have 200-300 of them. Why didn't they use that? Why did they elect to use the Zulfikar? I think that's a question I just don't know the answer to. On missile defense, Qatar is perfectly located to be the kind of the hub for all missile defense activity because of where it is geographically. But presently, the degree to which the countries actually cooperate on air and missile defense is surprisingly low. The degree to which it can occur is done through a hub and spoke, with the U.S. acting as the hub. There is an interest in doing more cooperation, but there's just a number of barriers. The Emiratis are way out in front of everyone in terms of the way they view missile defense and in terms of what they've procured. They don't want integration to slow their progress internally, but I think they're open to it. I wouldn't be surprised if you see the Emiratis and the Saudis. Saudis just announced a huge purchase of 7 THAAD batteries and more Patriots. I wouldn't be so surprised to see them integrate their systems, but I don't know how they bring Qatar back into the fold in a way that they all trust each other and they actually connect all of their systems. So I'm pessimistic going forward, but optimistic by nature. So maybe things will change once this Qatar situation is resolved, or hopefully resolved. But for the foreseeable future, I don't see that as a promising development in the Gulf.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mike. I've got a question of my own. The guns and butter issue that both Mike Eisenstadt and Fawzi mentioned means that Iran has to continue putting a predominant part of its budget into welfare systems and other the butter part of that equation. And my question is, most of Iran's defense procurements to date have been domestic production because they haven't been able to buy major systems. Will the availability of buying foreign military purchases in 3 years, combined with the guns for butter debate, make it more likely that Iran will stop producing expensive, to the extent that domestic production is more expensive, and go off-the-shelf foreign procurement in cases where it's less expensive? Would you see that happening, Mike?
The ethos of self-sufficiency is so deeply ingrained in the whole revolutionary ethos that I think they're going to want to do as much of that as they can, simply because their history tells them that they cannot rely on external suppliers. The relationship with the Russians is a very fraught relationship. The S-300 experience was really sowed a lot of distrust on both sides, towards each other. So I think they will buy certain niche capabilities that they cannot produce at this time on their own in limited amounts to modernize and fill gaps. But I think, again, in the long run, I think the emphasis will be, as other speakers have talked about, trying to get as much co-production, technology transfer as possible, because, again, that's deeply ingrained in their whole worldview.
Yeah.
So it's a balance. It'll be a balance.
Okay, thanks. We're coming up to the last, I guess we have room for one more question here, and then any concluding statement. So here's the microphone coming, and then give your name and affiliation, please.
All right, we'll see if this works. I'm Charles Perkins. I'm a defense analyst at APAC. I guess primarily for Michael, but for anyone else as well, could you talk a little bit about the synergies, such as they are, between the Iranian missile programs and the North Koreans? And obviously a lot is known about cross-fertilization over the years, but specifically, what is each side looking to gain and maybe isn't getting from the other side? I mean, you might speculate, for example, that because the North Koreans have a much more robust conventional capability than the Iranians, that maybe they put more priority on the symbolic value of the ballistic missiles, whereas maybe the Iranians really see the ballistic missiles and the cruise missiles, UAVs, whatever, as a warfighting tool. When they look at each other's tests, when they look at what each side is doing in terms of the lost trajectory test and then submarines, for example, what are the goals of each side, and can they help each other, or are they really in the end just proceeding along parallel tracks?
That's a good question, and I've been wrestling with it for quite some time. My view is that the relationship has kind of changed over the years. But I mean, at first it was highly transactional. The Iranians provided the money, the North Koreans provided Scud missiles and eventually the No-Dong missile in the 90s. And these became basically the foundation for Iran's missile program. As I said, though, you see them shifting more and more towards the solid propellants, and for a number of reasons. Now, one of the questions I'll have going forward is, we've been, at least I was quite surprised, not at the Musadon, but, has that been transferred, or those engines been transferred to Iran? I just don't know. There have been reports, kind of tabloid reports that it happened, but I don't know that it actually did. It did in what numbers. But this new engine that powers North Korea's most recent Hwasong 12 and 14, that really worries me, because if you have access to that engine, you can build whatever you want, including a heavy ICBM. Now, is that in Iran's, immediate goals? I don't think so. I don't think Iran sees a need to be able to threaten Europe and the continental United States at this point, especially with its nuclear weapons program capped. That may change in 10 to 15 years, but that's a long. In terms of cooperation now, I think it's actually quite limited. I would say there's cooperation since they probably trade test data, but not a lot of details. I don't think they're collaborating. I have several reasons for making that conclusion. And I'll get to real briefly. I've talked to two Russians, one Ukrainian that actually worked in Iran in the 90s, early 2000s. All of them said that they knew each other were there, but they never ran into them. They said that Iran compartmentalizes its program for security reasons. It's heavily compartmentalized. This makes collaboration with someone very difficult. Two, if you look closely at the designs, what North Korea or Iran have done and not done is very interesting. North Korea never adopted the Goddard-1 design, which is the modernized version of the Nodong. And I don't know, I can't explain it. Two, the satellite launch vehicles, the Simorgh, which is Iran may have tested, the basic foundation looks very similar because that's what they have available to them for Nodong engines. But if you look at the details of how they've designed them, they're not identical. They've chosen different design solutions for this. And this, again, points me away from this idea that they're collaborating closely. And there are a few other examples. I think I wrote an article in 38 North that looked at it about a year ago, which I could refer to.
The difficulty of asking a question of somebody who's thought about this a lot is you're going to get a detailed answer. There's more to tell, but we've run out of time. So let me stop here. Thank you all for coming, filling up our room today on this nice summer day. Thank you, live audience, and for the good questions. Please join me in thanking the panel.